Okay, I put the agenda on everybody's desk, and for the people in the audience, there are agendas at the sign-in table if you didn't get one. Yourself. My name is Scott Tusa. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the County of Huron, and both councils have asked me to mediate a joint council meeting. And so that's what this is. It's an official council meeting on both sides. So to start, I'm going to ask Mayor Gowing to open the Morris Turnberry portion of the meeting with whatever motion formalities you need.
At this time, I'd just like to state Councilor David Baker is not in attendance. I believe it would be best to carry on with the meeting to be timely and if he can show up in the process. I guess the purpose of this special joint meeting was called to meet with the North Huron Council concerning the cross-border servicing agreement that we have between the two municipalities. I guess at this time I'd call this meeting to order, and it may be appropriate to have a motion from our council to open the meeting. A motion made by Councillor McCollum, seconded by Councillor Ward to bring this meeting to order. Ask the question. Those in favor? That is carried.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Gowing. And Vincent, same.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to those attending. Hopefully things go well tonight. And I will ask for a motion from the North Huron Council to approve this special meeting. Line and reach. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you very much. Item 2 on the agenda, I just wanted, is really directed to the audience. And I just want to emphasize that both councils are meeting in public, obviously, but it's not a public meeting per se. So there isn't an opportunity for public input tonight. There are other opportunities available to you to, should you be interested in what is said tonight or want to follow up, you can always write to the councils. You can ask to be a delegation on a council meeting in either municipality, or you can approach individual councillors if you wanted to share your points of view. So we have other opportunities, but tonight is a council meeting and not a public meeting receiving input from the public. The other thing that I've been asked to point out is that there may be some people that would like to electronically record the meeting, and that is fine for both municipalities. And all we would ask is that anybody who wishes to record either video or audio to just stand up and give your name for the record, and Gary Long and Nancy Mickey would take that down. Anybody want to?
Steve Hill.
Thank you. And will you be doing audio or video or both?
Both.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Richard Al, doing audio and video.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Okay, thank you. So I think we'll just have introductions. The name tags are a little hard to see probably for some people. In fact, I have to squint a bit to see all the way down to David and John. But I think it would be helpful perhaps for the audience if people just introduce themselves. So we can start with Councillor Hallahan.
Jay Callahan, Councillor, North Huron, East Monash Ward.
Dave Reeves, Deputy Reeve.
Brock Bodden, Blythe Ward.
Neil Vincent, Reeve, North Huron.
Bernie Bailey, William Ward.
Jim Campbell, East Walnut Ward. Thomas Hunt, North Turnberry.
Neil Walling, Morris Wood.
Jamie Heffer, Turnberry Ward.
Paul Gowing, Mayor of Morris Turnberry.
Jason Breckenridge, Deputy Mayor of Morris Turnberry.
Jamie McCollum, Morris Ward.
Nancy Mickey, Morris Turnberry.
Gary Long, North Huron.
Okay, thank you all. Item 3 on the agenda, sorry, item 4 on the agenda is the acceptance of the agenda. Are there any comments or alterations proposed for the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. I'd like to just turn over the agenda for a moment and just run through the ground rules and process of mediation. So the ground rules are to help with a successful mediation, and the first one is that participation is voluntary. So both councils are here tonight in a voluntary capacity, and that's appreciated. You clearly have some interest in addressing these matters and resolving the issue, hopefully to the mutual benefit of both parties. But it's recognized that it is voluntary. No one is requiring either council to be in attendance tonight. The discussion is undertaken without prejudice, and this is an important one for council to appreciate, especially because this meeting is being held in public. And the purpose of a mediation is to explore solutions, and it's not necessarily to state positions. So I want councillors to feel comfortable to offer suggestions, to raise ideas, to be creative in your comments. And the without prejudice means you will not be held to that position. So if you want to suggest a course of action, you can entirely change your mind later on. You might float the idea because it comes to mind, but after further discussion, you decide maybe it's better to go. That's fine. So this meeting is not about entrenching in positions. It's about trying to be creative to find solutions. So I want people to feel comfortable doing that, and I appreciate that that's difficult for council to do in a public meeting, in a public session, because and in addition, the one that is being recorded. So I'm saying this for the benefit of the recordings as well, just to emphasize that when any councillor makes a suggestion, a comment, you will not be held to that. This is a mediation session. It's not about setting conclusions. If we can arrive at a conclusion tonight, that's excellent. But obviously, it would have to be ratified for further discussion. We'll identify common interests where possible, and I may interrupt you from time to time and ask you what the interest is behind the comment that you're making, because I think if we explore interests, people can understand better what the issues are, and we are going to take a minute and try to put a few up on the board. Listen to understand. So it's important in a mediation that we all have our ears working well, and speak to be understood. So try to be clear. Elaborate if you need to, use examples if it's necessary to get your point across. And of course, dialogue respectfully, discuss the issue, not the person. So the process of mediation is pretty straightforward. I have not discussed the file with either party. So I'm not terribly familiar with the issues. That's a good thing. I don't have a position on the issues. I'm familiar, obviously, with planning and servicing intermunicipal agreements, but I don't have a particular stake in one direction or the other in this matter. And I haven't discussed the file with the parties, other than I've had 2 short teleconferences with Gary Long and Nancy Mickey just to set up this evening and develop the agenda and those sorts of things. So I won't be making recommendations. It isn't my place as in this process to make a recommendation. I'm simply facilitating the process. I will do a report, however, but the report will be a report back on what occurred tonight and any conclusions or next steps that are agreed upon amongst the parties. So I think that's all. Any questions on the process or the ground rules?
Not a question, Scott, but I'd just like to make a comment. We're very fortunate to have you here in the capacity of facilitator this evening. You're very well respected within the province in your position of Director of Planning and Economic Development. And we're very fortunate to have you oversee this process. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So let's move on, and I'm going to stand up for a minute. Number 6 is the goals for the subject area. We are going to talk about interests and spend a few minutes on that, and there might be a bit of overlap between these subjects, but we'll give it a try. So what I would like to do is just jot down, ask for some open comments on what goals you have for the entire area. I'm not talking just about the Wingham an area portion of North Huron. We're not talking about just the surrounding area in Morris Turnberry. We're not even specifically talking about servicing when I ask you for goals. But with respect to the general area, I'd like to invite you to suggest what goals do you have for this area? And feel free just to jump in.
Economic development growth.
Other comments?
Providing high-quality services at the most economical rate that we can provide them.
Okay.
Create jobs for our region.
Jobs, okay. Okay.
Develop this specific area into a regional center. It's at the crossroads of two major transportation corridors, Highway 4 and 86.
Okay.
Sustainable progressive growth for employment into the future.
Pardon my right. Sustainable progressive. What was the end of that, Councilor?
For employment into the future.
For employment. Any others? Councilor?
Cooperation.
Okay, great. We got the right goals up here. Any others? Councilor Bowman.
Establishing a cooperative spirit to assist us with all kinds of agreements between the two municipalities.
Okay. So cooperative spirit and future agreements, or?
Yeah, for
All kinds?
all future agreements.
Any others? Other goals? So just before we move on to interest then, is there anyone on either side of the table that disagrees with any of these goals? You're comfortable with economic development and growth, high quality services at the most economical rate, jobs for the region, developing a regional center at the highway intersections, sustainable progressive growth for future employment, cooperation, and a cooperative spirit for all kinds of reasons. So is it fair to say there's a consensus on those goals, that those are goals that both Morris Turnberry and North Huron are? It's not a trick question.
I'll say yes, guys.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's move on to interests. So interests might be a little more municipal specific, but not necessarily. There will be some common, likely some common interests as well. So I'm asking you, what are the interests in achieving a servicing agreement? Sort of, what's in it for you? whether it's North Huron or Morris Turnberry.
Basically, to have services that basically can support themselves for renewal as needed as time goes on.
To provide services, or?
Yes.
Sorry, I just missed the first part of that.
Yeah, to provide services, but in doing that, there has to be a basis that they will be cost effective in supporting themselves as time goes on. So that as infrastructure renewal on them needs to be done, that there will be money available to do that infrastructure replacement.
Okay, I'm just going to break that into two, but that's okay. So infrastructure renewal. Okay.
To have the shovels, land emissions, those emissions as well.
Shovel-ready lands available, okay.
Share resources and avoid duplication where possible.
Fair to both municipalities.
On this side.
Actually, that was pretty much mine. I want to make sure
Okay.
that it's in the best interest for our ratepayers.
Right. Okay. Fair and road, and best interest of ratepayers?
On both sides.
Here we go.
To have an inventory of known parcels of land.
Okay. So inventory of developable land, we can do that. Any other interests come to mind? We can add to this as the evening goes on too, if something comes to mind.
I think there's another one that's important, and that is various kinds of breakthrough to establish new kinds of industry and commerce and economic activity that we haven't thought of before, we can do together.
So, new opportunities?
Yes.
New opportunities, and you said if you work together, or you
Right,
want to
but
put words
we're
in?
new opportunities that we can capitalize on by working together.
Okay, any others? Last call for now on interest. We can add to these as we go.
Just a quick one, starting from administrative point of view, it's helpful for Nancy and I to have an agreement because of deadlines, terms, conditions, expectations, obligations, and requirements. Which I think
So
is
it
helpful for everyone.
helps staff.
Helps that.
So help staff know the terms.
Expectations, expectations, obligations. Financial considerations.
Okay. Good, so I'm just going to go through these. And I think you've identified on both sides issues that, or interests that probably apply to each other. So if there is something that you disagree with that doesn't apply to your side, your municipality, let us know. So North Huron has said cost-effective services, infrastructure renewal, sharing resources, avoid duplication, fair to both municipalities, new opportunities capitalized by working together, help staff know the terms, expectations, obligations, and financial considerations. So I'm going to ask the Morris Turnberry side, is there anything there on that list that you would disagree with as an interest? A general interest, not just North Huron's interest. In other words, are those things that you can appreciate need to be on the table? Any objection to any of those? So you could, I guess I'm asking you, I'm not going to hold you to it, but I'm asking you that for now, they seem like a reasonable set of interests that could apply just as easily to Morris Turnberry as. Fair? See a few nods. And then Morris Turnberry has said it would be good to have shovel-ready lands available, an inventory of developable land, fair to both parties, and in the best interest of ratepayers. So I'm asking North Huron if there's anything there that you would disagree with from North Huron's perspective.
They're all motherhood.
So, okay, good. So I think that's excellent, because I think really we can interchange these municipal titles at the top and the interests apply to both. So there's a common set of goals that you have, which are all laudable goals. There's a common set of interests, and I'm particularly encouraged by things like fair to both parties, cost-effective, having development lands, which ties back into the economic development goals. So I think there's a lot of good interests there that apply generally across the board and will help further the goals. So with that in mind, with that context in mind, we're really just now going to open it up for discussion on the servicing agreement. And I may bring you back from time to time to ask you, are we keeping in mind the interests with something that you might be putting out there for discussion? It might be an idea, it might be a proposed solution. And I might ask you to tie it back to the interests, or does it tie it back to the interests? So I'm just going to open up the conversation now. It doesn't matter to me who goes first. I mean, unless everybody wants to speak at once, I don't think we need to do too much in the way of raising your hand. I think we can make it a relatively free-flowing conversation. And I'll just reserve the right to interject at certain points if I feel like we need to come back to the common points that we've made, or have somebody elaborate on something.
Scott, maybe I'll say that we threw out somewhat of a proposal. We would give Morris Turnberry the opportunity to discuss any of the points on that that they would like first, if that would be okay with the meeting.
Sure.
I'm just wondering before we start there, Neil, you gentlemen all received this this morning, it's a proposal. Do they have other copies of this here? You give them, they don't have this. I sent that proposal this morning. Yes, I have two gentlemen down here that
I think it's in your, I think it's at your desk.
It's in the package dated November 26th. It's a proposal from North Huron.
But there was one sent out this morning, February 10th. Did you guys have it February 10th?
And was the one this morning, was that a backgrounder? Right, so I don't know if it was a proposal of sorts, but I think it was a backgrounder of information, facts and figures and so on from
And other communities that are involved in this. Show the other communities are doing as neighbors too.
Do they have the backgrounder? It's your council?
They do not have the background.
So in light of Morris Turnberry not having that, I'm wondering if someone from North Huron would like to just outline, if there's anything you want to highlight on that backgrounder, because as Nancy says, they probably have the information that would be in previous.
It's basically that there was the 6 points from the original. Basically, I think point number 3, if I'm correct in my assumption, that is the one that they were having trouble with. Basically, that was something, some kind of payment other than what North Huron's receiving now. Part of BM Ross's planning pamphlet that we had November 12th, it had various information in that in going forward and stepping into economic development and extra commercial, that basically for 2012, the most recent audited figures, the users of water and sewer for Wingham users was $1,194,018, and the Morris Turnberry users, it was $25,156, which represents 2.1%, and we have guaranteed capacity to Morris Turnberry of at least 5.8% in water and 7.5% in sewer, and that while the 1.5% fees on Morris households, that's probably fair, but there's commercial and industrial for the investment that's in it. Basically, we feel that it's coming up short. For us to guarantee more capacity, that we need something else to have something to give us money that we can repair infrastructure as needed. We don't feel it's in the current agreement.
So Rita Vincent, I just want to clarify something so that everybody understands those facts that you put up, is that it represented in 2013, Morris Turnberry ratepayers paying into the water and sewer system represented about 2% of total revenue.
That's actually 2012.
Or 12.
That BM Ross did a study on.
Okay, thank you. So for 2012, 2.1% of the revenue was paid by the Morris Turnberry side of the line, if you like.
Yes.
But the capacity was somewhere around 6 to 7% of water and sewer reserved for. So my question, just so everybody understands, why the difference? Is it that Morris Turnberry, I mean, I know that the new Westcast plant is dark at the moment, so presumably that's a portion of it. But,
I maybe can speak to that, Scott. In 2007, that large industrial user paid an amount very close to $95,000. There's about a $70,000 difference when they are online, and that is the difference. It's more than the difference that's being discussed here. You know, that plant represents 93% of the water allocation to Morris Turnberry. And, you know, the consultant was quite adamant that when that plant was up and running, there was more than enough monies to run the system. The difficulty has become apparent since its date, so that has been adjusted down. So, you know, that, I'm not so sure how relevant capacity allotted to a usage figure is. You'll never have the two of them match. Actually, when that plant was running, what the actual dollars paid was actually 7.3 of the operational cost. It was about the 6%. So there was additional money there in that. So, as I say, I don't believe we'll ever get the two to match. So, there's undeveloped properties that we have agreements for, and they will have to pass us aside for it. And how do you expect them to be part of that mix when there's nothing there to be used?
And is there an ongoing charge with a property like the large manufacturer that's currently dormant? Is there an ongoing charge in the agreement that, so not paying, presumably the water's turned off?
The valve's off.
And so they're probably not paying a volume charge, but is there any other standby charges that they're paying?
Yeah.
Capital cost or?
Yes, there is. Presently, that larger user is paying a capital reserve of $240 a month since 1998 for a 12-inch line. But that user is also, in the last 15 years, that amounts to $43,000. That's the capital reserve. But that user, over the 10-year period, was approximately $75,000 in service fees. That's $750,000. Plus another $280 a month since 2008. So that user has paid in excess of $770,000 since 1990. So take that offline, it's a big chunk of that. It makes quite a difference. The consultant stated, there wasn't a problem when they were online. I think our efforts here should be to encourage the reopening of that plant instead of looking for funds to be done.
So I think the principle here that if I understand it, the principle is that if a user of in North Turnberry is utilizing North Huron services, they'll pay a per use charge, a volume charge based on their usage. But if they cease using it, so if I use a residence as an example, when they go to Florida for the winter, they'll still pay a capital charge of some sort on a monthly basis, but they wouldn't be paying much or if any on water charge, for example, or sewer charge. Sewer is based on water consumption, so they kind of go hand in hand. So there is continued. So when a property is not actually utilizing the water or sewer, they're still paying a capital charge if they're connected to the system.
And the one thing that I'm not sure whether everybody understands, but on this capacity, that we're between 72 and 73% allocated capacity to Wingham. And once we hit age, in fact, if we even get within 3 or 4% of 80%, the ministry will start asking us to start doing all the environmental assessment, whatever we have to do to expand the system. 80% is the highest that they want the capacity used in case something, there has to be a sleeve in there for an unusual circumstance such as a big fire or whatever that could drop the water. And that in that, that when we have an allocation, we can't say, well, we're going to give it to somebody else. That allocation sticks with the property until the municipality takes it back. And we have no power to do that at all, so that whether that one plant is using the big amount of water or not, the pipe that basically the town of Wingham Reserves put in out to that plant is rusting at a higher rate probably than what it would be if water was being constantly run through it and changed, because stagnant water corrodes the pipes worse than moving water.
In that November 12th report that BM Ross did in regards to the servicing issue, it states there's 50 infilling lots in Wingham, including the capacity numbers. So under the same train of thought, like, are they being built, those infilling lots that you're suggesting, are they being built in an amount to compensate for the deterioration of the lines going by now? Because I think it would be the same issue.
The infilling lots don't all have agreements, so that there will, unless there's an agreement for supplying service, lots wouldn't be, unless there's an agreement for a hookup, they wouldn't be paying anything, would they? Nancy, have you got?
It says right here in the presentation from November 12th, the capacity includes 50 units infilled in Wingham. So that is included in your numbers.
That is,
So in our eyes, that should be treated the same way.
that those 50 lots on capacity, that there's no income from those infill lots though at this time.
So I just want to pause there for a minute, and then we'll come down to Councilor Warwick. The concept of user pay, is that an interest that we should put on the board? Is there a user pay approach? I see some nods in Morris Turnberry. On the North Huron side, is there a user pay approach?
We
Or
have
working
user pay
towards
too.
that?
We have user pay in North Huron as well. Yeah.
And
It's not to Morris Turnberry only, it's if we pay the user fees too.
So the user pay principle. And I just to flesh that a little bit, the user pay principle, does that includes, we've got to work here in Nancy did, but operations, upfront capital, and future replacement?
I think that's the idea. I think one of the recommendations I think the Walkerton report was that on a go-forward basis, that water sewer systems would be self-sustaining. Municipalities have a legal obligation to provide financial plan for their water and sewer system that's based on water and sewer rates. So it has to be self-sustaining.
And so I understand then that the current agreement has, so for example, we talked about the vacant industry is paying a capital charge on a monthly basis, but they're not actually getting charged an operating cost because they're not using the services. Does the same thing happen in North Huron? If do water and sewer ratepayers, are they charged a capital cost?
Yes.
They are.
That basically the capital cost, the charge per month towards reserve is the same for both municipalities.
Okay.
In that reserve, going into the reserve account.
Okay, so just for Morris Turnberry's benefit, it seems like North Huron's not asking Morris Turnberry ratepayers to pay anything that their own ratepayers are not paying.
True.
Is that fair?
On the capital.
For capital replacement. And appreciate that there's an upcharge on, probably going to be discussion about that, but, okay. Okay, sorry, Councilor Warwick.
I want to tackle the elephant in the room here, just because we're all getting around to discussing figures and percentages and stuff. And you kind of partially answered it by saying that I assume this system, water and sewer, is completely funded by itself, by its users, for operating, for capital, for future development. That's the way I would assume it's supposed to be looked after, and I would like an answer, yes or no. Is it currently funded 100% by the users?
Currently, yes, it is. that there was a lot of things that basically the town of Wingham put in when it was still money coming out of the tax base to build the system. But from now and until provincial legislation is changed, it will, repairs and update will have to be done from monies coming in to the system and into the reserves.
Okay, so all the capital money that's being collected now, where is it going?
It's going into a capital reserve.
And it has been for the last, like West Gas property's been paying into capital for that for 10 years or more. That's all going into reserve.
I'm not
Okay.
sure what the 10 years.
So if the system is 100% funded by the users, and we can prove that our users are paying their fair share, what's the extra money for?
You know, and when you say extra money, Councilor Rourke, you mean
They're asking for a surcharge over and above based on assessment of the property.
I have it here, it's number 3 of what they're requesting. 30% of the annual assessment taxes on Royal Turnberry properties currently serviced by North Huron, and 30% assessment on Morris Turnberry properties bordering North Huron that will eventually be serviced by.
So that's my question. If it's funded, what do you want the extra money for, and why are we trying to bury just the Morris Turnberry users with that?
So I think we should come back to the assessment issue. Let's just park that just for a minute and talk about the charge on the user rate. There's a user rate charge, which is something higher than 1.
It's also at the 1.5.
1.5. Okay, so I think, can somebody on North Huron answer Councilor Warwick's question about the rationale, the interest behind the increased charge on water and sewer?
As we approach the 80%, and we have to put in another lagoon and more pumps and another well, the reserve fund that we have now is going in for upkeep, maintenance, and repair and service of our existing system. When we have to expand our system and put in another water well, that money has to come from someplace.
Should I really pay 1.5 times more?
I'm gonna take that back to your agreement here, where it says that we're going to be responsible for our percentage of any upgrades or renewals that you're doing in the agreement. So, you know, you say you need the extra money to do future upgrades and stuff. We're already on the hook for that. We're already charging us for that. So now you want paid up front for it as well as down the road when you have to do it.
Well, actually, you know, I think I'm going to answer that. As I said when we first sat down, when we first started talking, I wanted to know if everybody got this one this morning. I believe I seen your hand up.
Yeah, it is now, Bill.
Okay. If you go to other jurisdictions, we're not trying to invent anything here in North Huron. Just go to the page that has other jurisdictions on it. And where you see other jurisdictions, you will see the city of Owen Sound, dealing with Georgian Bluffs, Goddard and Central Huron. You need to look at those.
Goddard doesn't have a deal with Central Huron on that. They have a deal with Walmart.
No.
They actually deals with both.
So if you look at those examples, it'll give you an idea of where we did not invent this.
Yeah, so if you go down the list, Bernie, City of Owen Sound, you're talking about boundary adjustment. Well, that's not open for discussion.
No.
That's what's the Godry Central here, and that's the owner of that property has tenants in there, and in that process, you know, what they pay directly to the town of Goderich is divvied up as a charge to those tenants in the lease agreement.
It is a 40
So
city
what-
tax share. yes.
Yeah, so
It's
I
a
don't know
tax
what
share.
that has to do with us. So the Godry Central here and boundary adjustment, that's an annexation, which is totally different than what we're dealing with here. That Stratford Firth, the boundary adjustment, a few years ago, that percentage of taxations on future development. Well, that's very similar to what took place with the Fernie annexation on the Willis property. only we asked for possibility of some development fees, and we were told flat no, that we could not do that. But presently, there's the transfer of the tax dollars for the agricultural lands to Morris Chamber. So that's very similar to what we've done at the Wills property. I guess moving on to King Carden, I believe that's an annexation also, and St. Mary's Perth South. There's been discussions there, but no development is taking place. They talked about that, but there's nothing to move to.
So Paul, you would agree then that these things are taking place, there's no argument about that? And the biggest thing...
Yes, they are, but they're not the same as what we're looking at here.
And the biggest thing is, it doesn't matter which town you're looking at, they've got millions and millions of dollars in water and sewer that they've paid, which we have in Wingham, paid for. And all we're saying is that we just don't see like other communities we want to give it away.
But our users are also paying for the system too, Bernie. Anything that is not in place today that's being used for development tomorrow, Morris Turnberry or who is developing it pays all the cost to put that line in the ground. There's an example that big industrial user is paying a monthly fee to date, has paid hundreds of thousands of dollars towards that 12-inch line. So you can't say that, we're not helping to pay for that infrastructure. These users become your users when they become users to your system.
But they're not paying taxes to our tax base, and that's what we have to have.
But this is user pay, and it's through the fees you for the service.
Just so you understand where we're coming from, and I'll...
If it's user pay, why would you take money out of general taxes or put on a neighbor of Wingham tax on top of what they're paying, which wouldn't even be going into the system expenses?
I think I've heard two answers, if I can summarize here, to Councillor Warwick's original question and what we've been talking about. The question was around why the surcharge on capital charges being levied, why the surcharge, if I understood the question correctly. And I've heard sort of two answers. One is that North Huron feels it's creeping towards the 80% mark to do an environmental assessment and the costs incurred there. So the involvement of the other people in the other producing municipality brings that cost factor closer to them. And the second, whether you agree with it or not, just put just and the second reason I heard was that the upcharge is for taking advantage of the existing capital that North Huron has in the system. So they have a water and sewer system that existed that their ratepayers were somehow involved with. I'm sure there were provincial grants, but clearly there was involvement locally. And so the upcharge is that the people plugging into that system today are getting an advantage, and they're asking, what I'm hearing is you're asking, or the current agreement is to help offset that charge, that cost that was incurred at some point in the past. So just summarizing, that's what I heard, and I don't know if there's any other reasons why there would be the surcharge.
So can I take that as I understand it, doesn't matter if we show you that 100% of your costs and fees are all being covered by users, and our users are paying their fair share. You don't care, that doesn't matter, you want over and above what it costs to run the services. That, to me, that's what it's all about. It's being paid for now, it's being looked at. That's not good enough. You want 30% of our tax going into those properties.
From what I'm hearing is that it's primarily because it accelerates additional cost, which, I mean, asset management is a bit of a moving target, and I'll bet North Huron's not there yet, and most municipalities aren't, for long-term replacement costs. But it accelerates the date at which that happens, and it's plugging into the existing system, so that there's an extra charge for plugging, right here, Robin, for plugging into the existing system. I am familiar with that in other locations. There is the agreement between Central Huron and Goderich does have an upcharge. I can't tell you off the top what it is when Central Huron residents connect in. And on the waste management side, we certainly had discussions with South Huron, and we just similar kind of approach.
So I have all kinds of figures here in front of me, with percentages and dollars that show, who paid what and how much and when and to who, and everything's being covered. So we might as well just take all this stuff and just bury it somewhere. That's not what we're talking about. Right?
I think what we're talking about right now is the upcharge on the sewer.
And I can understand the 1.5 rate upcharge on sewer and water possibly, but an additional 30% on taxes that they're requesting now makes no sense.
Okay, so let's go to assessment, unless you want something on.
Well, we're already
Mayor
in
Downey.
the agreements that we have placed for 2010, we're on the hook for replacement of the past. I'm somewhat a little confused. Water is, the capacity for water is being hindered, there's a pump needs to be replaced. So that doesn't seem like. So, there'll be an adjustment there. And in the past, if you put a date on the meeting, there's a public meeting in regards to services in North Richmond that I attended just in the public gallery. And at that meeting, it was stated that, most of the time, they're running with just half of the roof. Like there's two sections of the lagoon, and there's only half of it being used for treatment. So that's a somewhat different scenario than being close to capacity. Because if you've got half the lagoon not being used, and this came from their, water system. I'm a little confused.
Any comment on capacity?
In the sewage, there's great fluctuations in capacity depending on rainfall, and I'll say the North Trunk sewer, there's bad infiltration into it during times of high rainfall. In talking about the actual sewage lagoons and the ponds, they are basically settling ponds, and it's supposed to be treated so that bacteria are eliminated going through the plant. And that it is to try and clarify the water and let anything suspended solids drain out over a period of sitting there, and then they are lowered as to Ministry of the Environment allowances after we apply to release X amount. The one thing that I'll say with, say, 7% of our capacity left, till we're at 80% on water. If we are having shovel-ready plants, are we going to use more than that 7% if everybody came up with shovel-ready lands? And once we make a commitment of that portion of our capacity, it is out of our control. We cannot legally ask for it back or anything like that. So that we're a little cautious in that, because it doesn't seem like there's near enough to cover capacity that isn't being used, and especially in commercial industrial.
Just going to go by Mayor Dowling down to the end of Councilor's speech.
So the north plant of West Cast, you're saying that it doesn't become a foundry and it got, say, changed over to a different business that used very little water, that you couldn't change that rating on that plant?
That I'm not sure. I believe you guys could, but we can't. We have committed that portion of our capacity.
And then this 80%, just in the last 20 years, what's been the increased volume in the last 20 years on the sewage?
I can't, I'd have to ask Don Nicholson, who's in charge of all that.
His lane has not expanded that rapidly, that in probably 20 more years, you probably won't get that 80% yet. is what I'm seeing. And I think we're jumping the gun on it. That's my opinion.
On the November 12th meeting, the consultant was adamant that this issue of unused capacity of that larger plant needed to be addressed. And with what we talked about, that could be reallocated. That came directly from the consultant. So it's something, he stated more than once that it was something that was being done.
So I'm wondering if that might be something that Gary and Nancy might be able to follow up on and determine what's the process to reallocate capacity.
And the idea, one of the figures here, like it's 93% of Morris Turnberry's water usage in North Carolina, one institution. So it's sizable. So if that could be reallocated, it's big.
And I think it's worth knowing the answer to that question. It doesn't mean that you're going to reallocate it, because again, keep in mind some of the goals here. You may want to have that as, that's better than a shovel-ready property. I mean, that property can be put back into production if the right company is available. So, but I think it'd be worthwhile having the answer to that question. Maybe that's something that we can check the agreements and find.
I think we're getting hung up on some issues here, but I think the issue that I'm concerned about is not so much the dollar value and all that, but it's in 5 years or 10 years from now, when we do reach our capacity, or if we reach our capacity, that there's money in reserves, and we don't have to come to the council of the day in Morris Turnberry and say, hey, we reached our capacity, we need money, can you provide your share? And they say no.
There's agreements in place.
The agreements are in place, but that's for the existing properties. So does Morris Turnberry have a reserve account for future expansion of water and sewer? And that's where my concern is.
In the annexation agreement, it's set out in the annexation agreement that Morris Turnberry would be responsible for their share of replacement costs on a portion share for the Willis property. So therefore, if there's development on the Willis property, that's where the annexation, the area the annexation dealt with. If there is expansion to the systems required because of development on that property, Morris Turnberry will be responsible for their proportionate share of the cost.
But
So that was
if you
already-
expand, if there's expansion over at Turnberry Township to the north of Wingham, are there reserve funds in place for expansion of the sewage system from there?
So I think that's why you charge a capital replacement charge to the users. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, but that's what that's for. It actually goes into North Huron's reserve account. As opposed to Morris Turnberry's.
But that's for replacement and upgrades to the current system. That doesn't expand the system or grow a new well or look after future expansion of the sewer, in my understanding.
Capital is capital. That's to fix a line that's there now, to upgrade it or replace it, or to install new equipment. It's all capital. That should all be under that one charge as far as my understanding.
I guess there's a question here is whether users, existing users, do they pay, I'm guessing the capital charge, correct me if I'm wrong here, is for the replacement of the capacity that the existing users are using today. It's not a capital bank to expand the system. That money has to come from somewhere else, I'm thinking. And the future users are paid a capital charge to replace the capacity that they're using. That would be the user pay principle, right? I know it gets a little more muddled than that when you get the accountants involved, but that would be the principle, is that the capital charge is not for the expansion that Councilor Reach is talking about. That would be, you might apply to Infrastructure Ontario for a low-interest loan, or you might debenture it, or you might use some other reserve in the municipality and pay it back for that type of expansion. So I think the capital charge, if we're clear, is just for the future replacement of the capacity people are using today.
So am I hearing that the North Huron Council doesn't believe that we would be good for our share of the new system?
That's pretty blunt question, but I will say one thing, I've heard a lot of guys. Well, I think the answer is you're already paying for that. If I stated that fairly, I think your ratepayers are already paying for that in their monthly charge. There's always a question around asset management, bit of a moving target, has to be recalculated from time to time. So those costs may go up, down, may be different in the future, but I think they're already paying for that. I'm presuming that, I don't know, Nancy or Gary, the existing agreement, not the one on the annexation, but the other existing agreement, does it say something in addition that Morris Turnberry would pay its share of the capital upgrades?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
So I'm going to throw something out because I wasn't involved in the agreement, don't know the reasons behind it. But I'm suggesting that that clause is probably in the agreement because whatever the capital charge is on a monthly basis, we've heard what a figure of what the industrial residential users pay, something commercial users pay. Whatever that is, it might not actually be enough when it comes to actually doing the capital replacement project. And I'm presuming that clause is to protect North Huron, that if an extra 5% is required, North Huron's got to find a way to come up with that. Sorry, Morris Turnberry. You might charge it back to the ratepayers, you might do all those other options that we have.
Just as an indication, when things are going full bore and we had all the users were, we didn't have vacancies and whatnot. Back in 2007, when that big industrial user was present and paying, their user fee, Morris Turnberry was paying 7.3% of the cost of the system in North Huron. So if we're only 6% of the capacity, that's an indication, things are going good, everybody's on board. There's additional fees in there.
Is that water and sewer or just water?
That is water and sewer.
So it would have been pretty close because I heard 5.8 for water and 7.5 for sewer. So if you were paying 7%, somewhere in the middle, I think you were paying the proportionate share, or at least that user was.
Well, I believe it's actually beyond the usage figure. So, and again, I reiterate, the usage versus the actual money paid is very seldom ever coming to match the figures.
Yeah, capacity is really all you can go on, and then you renegotiate capacity if that's possible. One house might use twice as much water as another house, but capacity we can't use. I said that we'd come back to assessment. It's been mentioned a couple of times. So I think we can come back to this issue of the surcharge and debate that a bit more. The issue of assessment, I want to go back to the annexation agreement. So I understand there was no assessment agreement in the annexation agreement. There was no assessment sharing. When the Willis Farm went to North Huron from Morris Turnberry, it was sort of a land exchange for servicing on the commercial side.
Yes, but there also was to be paid the appropriate, on agricultural lands, those taxes were to be forwarded yearly to Morris Turnberry.
Okay. Is that
until it was developed.
And is that occurring?
Yes.
I believe so.
Yeah.
We attempted in those negotiations to get, like a lot levy, a term, a development fee per lot as the lots were developed. And just a flat no, that they would not pay that.
So, yes, so essentially, until development occurs, and of course we all know there's a large plan of subdivision on that property, but we would expect that subdivision to roll out in phases. So there would continue to be some agricultural assessment, and that would then be, that's paid back to Morris Turnberry.
Yes, it's a minimal amount on these, at 25%.
Yes. So on the issue of assessment, just to throw a couple of ideas out there, North Huron has identified a couple of areas where that's done. The agreement, again, I haven't seen the whole agreement between Goderich and Central Huron, but I understand there is an assessment sharing arrangement or clause in that agreement, and it phases out over time. And I can't tell you what the years are, but it's, you know, it's a certain percentage share for 5 years, another percentage for the next 5, and it's a declining scale until eventually the assessment is all remaining in Goderich for the lands that have been used.
That's a friendly annexation.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And that's partly why I want to take you back to the Willis, because that was a friendly annexation as well, I think.
Yeah, no,
And
we know.
And, you know, there was a solution worked out there, good, bad, or indifferent, you know, with hindsight and 2020 vision hindsight. There was a solution worked out there that appeared amicable to both parties. And Wingham, was it before North Huron?
It was North
It was
Huron.
after North Huron. So North Huron got land, residential land to expand on, and that's occurring now. And Morris Turnberry got an agreement for services. So it, on the highway commercials and stuff. So it was a land services kind of arrangement. It was very similar to the Central Huron Goderich agreement.
And it's a situation Morris Turnberry will not realize on really anything out of that agreement until the development on the commercial farm. It is a scenario where we did not have the ability to service the residential area, but in North Huron was short of residential lands at that time. So it seemed to be the right thing to do.
So any thoughts on this idea of assessment? North Huron has floated the idea of an assessment, recouping assessment from properties that are connected to the system. Is that what I understand? So, and I'll just point out, you know, I don't think you know this, but in the previous arrangement, there was neither a request or an agreement for North Huron to pay Morris Turnberry assessment on the residential lands, nor was there a requirement for Morris Turnberry to pay North Huron an assessment on the commercial lands.
Scott, I just want to put it up there, the last meeting we had with PM Ross in this room, he said that wasn't on the table. It wasn't going anywhere, we're not interested whatsoever in giving up any assessment on those properties. And I'd say that's still the position. So it's not on the table.
You're not even sure at this point that it's actually legal to assess, you know, user pay, services should be user pay. If it's legal to turn around and reassess those costs to those properties.
It would be called payment in lieu, and a percentage of assessment is one way of calculating a payment in lieu, and all municipalities that are making payment in lieu have an actual deal, and the agreement will probably never state a percentage.
But going back to the idea of user pay, we wouldn't be taking that out of our general funds. The services, someone at Belmore or Walton, you know, a service issue that around the edge of Wingham, you know, has no advantage to them at all. To be totally unappropriate, to be collecting tax dollars from both individuals to put into someone receiving services in this area.
But in the sense of economic development, if you take a look at what development lands do, there's restrictions on a number of things that you can do, but there is things that a municipality can do to help entice. North Huron has offered a number of things on the legal side for people wanting to develop a business, and we have tried to work with them. and it isn't always user paid. If everything is user paid, they're gonna go someplace where the council will help them some way.
There's a process, I believe, North Huron's just gone through this process of setting up a development fee for a newly developed area. There's an entire process, I believe, that where an engineer's involved, looks at the costs of servicing that area. And they come down to a per person cost, and then, you know, they average what 3 persons per household, and it comes down to a cost per development lot.
Development charges?
Development charges. Well, in that process, development fees, development charges are charged to the residential areas of a settlement area. My understanding is we do not go there in regards to commercial or industrial developments, because you want those developments to come to your area, and with an extra charge, development charge put on, you know, you're limiting yourself as to who's going to come. So my understanding, you do that for residential areas. The rule of thumb is you do not put development fees on, you know, commercial or industrial.
There are different approaches to that. Yeah, there are different approaches, and it's a municipal decision. There are municipalities that will, for instance, even on residential, they will have reduced or eliminated the development charge, say, for residential downtown. They want to stimulate development downtown, or maybe commercial industrial.
The engineer will come up with, say, a $10,000 figure for the additional cost of the services in this newly developed area, and the council has the ability to go up to that amount or choose an amount somewhat less, in my understanding. And the idea is, you know, it's not used on commercial industrial areas to be a deterrent for development there, and that development is what you want in your community to stimulate the economy, to stimulate the job.
You're right, that does occur in many cases. Councilor,
I guess it was just a question whether the 30% of taxes came from, and whether, to that, whether North Huron's taxes, 30% of the users are going into reserve for the system as well? Or is this just going into general coffers?
That's a good question. If there was an assessment sharing, would it be for operations of North Huron, or would it be allocated somehow to service?
That's still as a possibility. That letter that we sent was a starting point. That we needed some discussion. And basically, as development charges are, I don't believe our development charges could go across the municipal boundary. So that's one thing that we do charge on certain construction. But that's another place we would fall behind by exporting a service outside our municipality.
Yeah, just on, to clarify Councilor Breckenridge's question, it's a good one, is that, as Reed has said, the assessment has been undecided how you might use those funds, but generally those funds would be unrestricted funds. So the municipal council receiving those funds, if the agreement was reached, would decide how to use them. Whereas if there's a capital charge levied on a service like sewer and water, there's a statutory obligation to put that into the reserve. They can't spend it on light bulbs or the arena or whatever. It has to go into a reserve.
Then, sorry, follow up. How can we even put that in a service agreement if it has nothing to do with the service? If it has nothing to do with water or sewer, why is that belong to services?
So yeah, that's a fair question. That would be good to have a perspective from North Huron.
From my point of view, if we put our own industrial park, can we get 100% of the taxes? Can we supply water and sewer? And if we give you water and sewer for nothing, we get nothing.
That's what we pay for.
No, users of this park.
Yes.
You are not.
But it's within our boundaries, we have to register tax within our boundaries, and we have to provide the services we provide to the properties just the same. So, you know, as far as giving up an assessment on those properties, that's just a long start.
Okay. Councilor Reed.
First of all, what would happen with this money is we got hard to pay taxes. As long as I was in council, it would go into reserves on, or my opinion is it would go into reserves for water and sewer, period. And on our interest sector, we said fair to both, and then Jason said fair to the ratepayers. I wonder if it would be fair to the ratepayers in both municipalities by not coming to some sort of an agreement on cost sharing. And when we have a new industry within Morris Turnberry, the benefits of all the taxes go to Morris Turnberry and all the residents of Morris Turnberry, and we provide the services. And you could argue that people that work in those industries are going to live in Wing or in North Huron Township, but they may also live in Bucknell, they may also live in Howick, they may also live in Listowel. So we may not get the benefits of it. We put up here that we want to share opportunities, and I agree we need to share opportunities, and we need to work hard on sharing opportunities, and we need to work together on economic development. But it has to be fair to the ratepayers on both sides of the highway.
I think these types of development on the fringe of your settlement area is a benefit more to your settlement area than it is to Morris Turnberry. Through housing, you know, the use of your businesses and on and on. You know, if the people are working there, they may live a ways away, but they're going to tend to coffee shop there. We see it as a real benefit to North here.
And I understand that, and I appreciate the fact that the people that work here may shop here, but a lot of them don't.
So to that, by fair, I mean, are you planning on implementing a 30% tax hike to your ratepayers to cover their share of the costs?
You said no to the 30%, so it's a non-compensation. You're just wasting time.
Okay, sure.
I'd like to get a response to this. When Bruce Potter was talking, he gave us an opinion on the rates being charged and so on. He didn't take into account the huge amount of money that William ratepayers poured into developing the system. That's a terrific, it's a huge value this year. And so I think that part of our argument here is based on compensation for that investment that's in the system. It won't have to be replaced immediately. And I'd just like to respond.
Well, any additional users coming on, there's your capital fees immediately. Your 2,500 for water, 3,500 for sewer.
That's the same for everybody, Paul.
But any of those additional properties, if they have to put the lines in the ground, it hasn't been a burden to North Huron in any way. And we just see it as it's covered. It has been covered.
So I think Councillor Vaughn is asking, correct me if I'm wrong, is asking, is it acceptable or considered reasonable by Morris Turnberry to pay a surcharge, whatever that number might be, pay a surcharge on water and sewer for the benefit of plugging into the existing system, the existing capital expenditure?
Well, that is the idea of the 1.5 times rate per unit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm asking, is that, they've given you the rationale for that, is that acceptable to Morris Turnberry? Let's not talk about whether it's 1.5 or 1.3 or 1.7.
We, in that meeting with the consultant, it seemed quite evident to us that, what is taking place is more than fair. There should be additional monies paid because of, the reasons you're stating, and there is substantial. It is quite substantial money over a number of years.
I don't think that's what Brock asked. Brock said that we spent, let's just say we spent $50 million on our water tank in our sewer lagoon. We've already paid that. You own a car. Are you gonna give me your car and I'll put the gas in it, when it wears out, I'll give it back to you? I think Brock's asking, how do we get compensated for the millions and millions of dollars we put into it so far? The money that you're talking about, 1.5% moving forward, everybody pays, whether it's North Carolina 1% or you get 1.5%. That's to keep it up and in shape and going forward.
You have a certain amount of overhead to run a system. You use a system for your people, it's there. The additional users, in my mind, that are provided by Morris Turnberry help cut the cost to your own users by having more users. You know, you're spreading the cost over more individuals. And we're talking very small percentage of use. You know, it's less, in our eyes, it's less than 5% with these actual vacancies and whatnot.
So again, Paul, I'm gonna ask you, the $30 million we originally put into it, I don't wanna talk about, again, you're talking about moving forward and paying for wear and tear.
The additional users are helping with the additional fees we're putting in.
For the wear and tear moving forward, who's going to pay for
That is a portion of your user fees. It's legislative, it's in there.
Is that replacement or is that original cost?
That's your original cost. I have no idea. Whatever it was, the original cost, who's going to pay?
So there's a lot between the original cost and the replacement cost. And we're in on the replacement cost for our percentage.
That's right. Yeah. So what we're talking about is the surcharge, the 1.5 at present, is North Huron's charge to Morris Turnberry ratepayers to into an existing system that the other municipal ratepayers paid for, their predecessors paid for.
And the one thing that we're looking at that meeting on the 12th of November, Bruce Potter made the statement that the $10 per household capital charge per month doesn't think that is near enough. That's something that will happen irregardless, and we're not that far away from commissioning as to where we have to take that. The one thing that I will say, under the Drinking Water Act, the Council of North Huron are legally responsible for having enough put away. And as of a year ago, New Year's, if we don't, there's up to a 20-year personal liability that each of us as councillors take. And that the way things are now, it's sort of bare bones as to what it might be. And I think the capital charge in both municipalities, if it has to go up to reflect what might be needed in the system, I don't think there's a lot of opposition in that. So that's a place we more or less agree that if the study comes back and said the capital charge on each house and each, I'll say, different pipe size to the bigger users, that's something that we can probably agree on. The thing of it is, it's bare bones. We have administration on top that maybe we should be charging back to our water and sewer system for our administrator and treasury, because it's part of their job. At present, we're basically throwing a bunch of things in that are costing us money, but in the current agreement, there's no reflection. And maybe that's our fault for not labeling and putting those costs in on the system. But in all fairness, there's costs that we have that we are not recouping out of this agreement.
So what I'm hearing, just if I could just say one thing, and then I'm going to turn it back to Mayor Gowan, is that I think I'm hearing that there's reasonable agreement on the capital charge. I haven't heard Morris Turnberry say they shouldn't be paying Morris Turnberry ratepayers shouldn't be paying capital charge. And there's some agreement on the surcharge, that there's some acknowledgement that there's an advantage to plugging into an existing system. And maybe it's to it's, you know, in a nominal way, repay the cost that the North Huron has incurred in the past to build the system from the ground up. And maybe it's also partly administration. It's not calculated into the user pay system. So I'm not hearing Morris Turnberry say that you're absolutely opposed to that. There might be some discussion around what that level should be. Have I got that right?
I think so, Scott. The comment I want to just make quite clear, like Morris Turnberry Council has that same obligation in regards to the service provided for water here in Belgrade. So we provide water to the North Huron side of the stream, and that rate is at a one-time. So we're looking after their side and we're able to do it here.
I think that's a good point to put on the table.
Pay for that system when it went in those stuff.
And so we paid for the system that's being, the parts that we're using.
That's many years ago.
So Jim, you're saying that when the water system went into Belgrade, the original upfront capital cost was apportioned to the municipality? Presumably based on the number.
Well, it's basically a 1/3, 2/3, because the original Belgrade water system was, when it started, was to be up to 40 lots out of the North Huron side and 80 lots on the Morris Turnberry. Partway through, that got jumped to as possible up to 160, and the upkeep, upgrades are still 1/3 North Huron, 2/3 Morris Turnberry.
So maybe a fair comment though on Morris Turnberry's part in the sense that you probably don't have, most municipalities don't have a perfect user pay system. And you're probably incurring some administration costs generally that are not being charged to the water rate. So, fair enough.
But to the administration or the in lieu of costs, office costs, if that's not being covered by the ratepayers, what the rates are? Does that not make some sense?
That's one way to do it.
Study issue, see if our rates and fees allow us to fund the system. We'll research that this year with the process system. Research public rates.
Well, they could consider administration costs. I mean, there'd be the direct administration of your staff directly. The question is, are your HR staff, the CAO's time, the treasurer's time, are they it's common not? They could theoretically.
I'd like to make a comment, remind you that we're not being held.
Yes.
These things, perhaps a blue sky kind of thing. It strikes me that the problem before us could involve a simple, not simple, but a complex analysis of the costs and so on. I see a long list of very positive things that fall into North Huron's bailiwick. The training, the planning, engineering costs, the studies that come up now and again, Ministry of Environment, regulation. It's a huge amount of work and cost that's continuous. But if we were to look at all of those costs and the inputs that we now have, and come to an objective analysis of what's fair, why shouldn't we aim that kind of objective input? Because I think that's the crux of the matter that we're trying to decide here. Is it fair? Is it 30% you get, or is it 0%? What is it?
Okay, Councilor Warwick, and then we'll come back.
And right from the start, we've stated all we want to do is pay our fair share. But we want to make sure it's our fair share of what it's actually costing. tie it to something, tie it to the cost of the system and the capital and any of your research or your consultants that you have to put in. That's all part of the system. That's all part of the cost. We want to pay our fair share of what systems are costing, actually costing, not 30% of the assessment of the taxes that you're collecting on those properties. That's not tied to anything. Tie it to a hard cost that we can explain to someone who wants to buy a piece of property in North Term development and wants to know what his costs are going to be for water and sewer. Okay, you pay 1.5 times the user rate that a similar property in North Term pays. You pay $2,500 on a pond, you pay $3,500 on a pond for sewer, you pay the price to install the line. If that's not fair and not covering all of the costs, then we need to know what is fair and what are the costs, and we can charge accordingly. If a resident wants to hook on a residential property for sewer and water and has to pay that $6,000 capital fee, should it not be that a property the size of Pioneer, for example, would pay substantially more to hook on to that system? Why are the fees the same? Should it not be more, or?
For industrial and commercial users, it's the size of the pipe that is assessed. And that basically, you use the example of Pioneer, they're not a heavy user of water, so that's one of the things that they're not. But Pioneer, to establish where they did, they required municipal water and sewer, is my understanding. And in the essence of being a good neighbor, we said, certainly, if there's a chance of them coming, we will do it. It's a dedicated capacity. We are questioning that if we have we have a finite dedicated capacity. If we use it up and basically giving it away for what the operational is and exactly the same, we benefit very, very little when we have actually allowed neighboring properties to go to immediately upon change of zoning to 4 times the taxes that you would collect if it was in the farm rate, and probably the same or more increase once a building is put on, so that an assessment on a property that gets sewer and water, that acreage, the assessment from impact could go up 8 to 10 times, benefiting the municipality that has that development.
I disagree with you on that point, but in all fairness to anybody wants to develop, if your development fee, your $6,000 hookup fee is not enough, then why don't we put that up? So then they know up front, this is what the charge is to get sewer and water.
Everybody pays the hookup charges. Our ratepayers pay it as well when we hook them up.
What I'm saying is probably not enough.
Mayor Downey.
It may be for residential, but not for.
If the pipe is already through, yeah, it probably is.
I just want to make,
But that's previous investment, the pipe going by, somebody hooking up now.
just want to make the point that, you know, the cost of these services to these areas has to be competitive. I think both councils lately have seen Mike Poland from your office, Scott, from the he's economic development officer for here in the county. And the competition for these businesses that are developing your area is quite fierce, and they're not competitive with the cost of the services. Those that are gonna develop are just gonna go down the road. I think we have to make sure that we're not charging exorbitant fees, and these are developmental lots. You know, none of what we're looking at are residential areas. There's a surplus, there's extreme surplus of residential areas in North Huron, and, you know, that's where that development will take place because of that, family annexation. You know, that has been given over to North Huron, that allows you to develop the residential areas. And, you know, what we're talking about here is industrial and commercial areas, and very few of them like that. It's not residential.
I'd like to go back to Neil's point. I think I'm in full agreement with what Neil said. The arrangement, the agreement needs to be fair to both people. We have an opinion that we need additional revenue from this, however it comes. You have the opinion that you're paying enough, you're getting too much now. So let's get an answer as to who is right, who is wrong, what are the actual numbers. Otherwise, we're just sharing opinions, which may never come together.
We were together with the meeting with the consultant, and what came from that meeting was a fair scenario. That's what we took from that.
Yeah, actually, if I quote him, he has acknowledged that North Huron, like many other, sorry, I'm back a little bit. While Bruce Potter believes that the current CBSA model of rate premiums and connection fees works, he acknowledges that North Huron, like many other municipalities, does not have adequate reserves. So it's not that the fees aren't adequate that we're paying, it's that there hasn't been enough being put away, correct?
So we need to up that, then, that's, like, our fees are not high enough to put that extra weight.
Or you should start putting money away sooner.
And what actual money is coming in, it goes back to percentage of dedicated capacity. It's one thing to only pay for what you use, but if there's costs that another municipality has because of having infrastructure or the pipe that goes out, if there's nothing coming, it's actually almost foolhardy to worry about extending services that we get any more than the bare cost, and we're not sure that we're collecting near enough now, and that we've already engaged the engineer to do a rate study on that.
So I think we did hear agreement that again, nobody in the Morris-Turnberry side is saying you shouldn't pay your fair share of costs. So the rate study might adjust, as I think somebody mentioned on the northern side. The rate study might identify that there's a new, you know, maybe there's different operational costs, like a volume per unit cost change. Maybe there's an increase, probably there's an increase in the long-term replacement, because asset management is, this is one of the ways the province is trying to deal with it, in my view, with the infrastructure deficit, is to encourage municipalities to do asset management planning and increase those capital replacement cost charges on the bills. It doesn't matter if you're talking, any utility is looking at that. So I think there's some general agreement there, where I want to bring us back, if I can, to, because those, as Councillor Vaughn said, those costs can be determined. There can be an information sharing between the municipalities as to what are the costs now, are they the right costs, what's the engineering study say about those costs. So I think that can be determined. I'd like to bring us back to the assessment issue. And I just want to throw out a picture in your minds, if I can. Just again, for the sake of trying to think this through, is that the Wingham portion of North Huron is pretty well hemmed in by Morris-Turnberry, and you pretty much develop to your boundaries. There isn't a lot of, there isn't a lot of commercial industrial development potential within North Huron without engaging Morris-Turnberry. So Morris-Turnberry does have a resource that's of value to North Huron, being land. And some of it is actually zoned and, you know, or sort of designated, and it could be zoned in a similar kind of way in that direction. On the other hand, on Morris Turnberry's side, what's in it for them? Well, you don't have a sewer and water system. And I think as somebody stated, Pioneer, for example, wanted to be on municipal water. It's quite common for these commercial industrial operations to want to be on municipal water and sewer. It has to do with their insurance, it has to do with fire protection, who knows what else. Could be, you know, head office policies or whatever. So while it's possible to do limited amount of commercial industrial on private servicing, it's not very common anymore. And so North Huron has a servicing system that you can plug into. So it seems to me like the interests and the goals that you put on the boards are kind of encapsulated there, is that Morris Turnberry has available land. And one hopes that if the right purchaser comes along, you have interested ratepayers as well to get engaged in this project, because in the end, it's private investment that makes it happen. And North Huron has servicing. So on the issue of assessment, I just want to throw this concept out, is that if there was no municipal boundary, I'm not suggesting you amalgamate, don't get me wrong, and please don't put that in the paper. I'm not suggesting that's a political decision I'm not going to wade into. But if there were no municipal boundaries, you'd have both. You'd have land, and you'd have servicing, and you'd have 100% of the assessment. And the capital replacement cost is going to be there anyway, because there's been general agreement that that has to be paid. So I just throw that out there. So with the municipal boundary, what do you do with assessment when, if not coming to agreement means virtually no development, then nobody wins. You know? And all of the pros and cons that you put out there, North Huron doesn't have more people to plug into their water system, Morris Turnberry doesn't have the commercial industrial growth we'd like to see. North Huron residents have fewer employment opportunities. I mean, you could go back and forth. There's all kinds of overlap in the benefits and the land. So I'm just putting it out there. If there were no municipal boundaries, you'd have it all. There is a municipal boundary. You've each got an important piece of the pie. So what do you do about assessment in that case?
Just to make the comment that through the friendly annexation, where there was, you know, substantial amount of residential land was transferred to within the boundaries of North Huron, Morris Turnberry has literally given up the ability to have more residential properties in the area. You have to go through a comprehensive review to show the need. That process takes in the whole community. So with such a large area in North Huron, we have given that up to North Huron to move ahead. And I believe it was the right thing to do, with the ability to service that. And look what's happened. You know, one of the largest proposals ever to come to Huron County is there. So, you know, I think that needs to be taken into consideration. You know, we're not talking residential. We've given that up to the settled area of Wingham in North Huron. You know, we're now talking just a handful of developmental plans for commercial or industrial uses. And, you know, I think we have added to the process of development to be able to see it.
Fair comment. North Huron? Councillor.
But going back to the statement you made earlier, Paul, on development charges, can you put development charges on industrial and commercial land?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I believe you can, but it's not common because you want those developments to come and you want to encourage them. You're not encouraging them by putting additional.
They absolutely do in the cities, the development charges. Most cities would have development charges on commercial industrial. They might have locations where they're trying to get sent new development, like I said, downtowns, for example.
Yeah.
It's quite common.
If I may add on that, there's different rates that the municipality can ask for commercial and industrial. And basically, about the 1.1% is what everybody in Huron County and some of our neighboring areas have stuck with as trying to attract somebody to come and build. So that it's the same as avoiding tabbing it on, that you could have a higher tax rate for them if you wanted, but
You're talking tax ratio.
yeah.
If you have an area that's high demand, also for lined up wanting to get in, then you better have a development charge so that in the future,
It's
you can
doable.
service this.
It'll do that situation. I've seen this here. I don't believe.
We should be clear that the development charge, where it exists, the Development Charges Act, and the engineers know it better than I do, but the Development Charges Act is very restrictive in how you do the calculations and what you can pay. So it's essentially it's a little bit like this surcharge that we've been talking about. It's essentially to pay for the capacity that you're going to consume in the existing system. That's what the development, and no more. And there's quite, tight rules around how that gets
And
calculated.
the council has the ability to charge up to that amount, but they can charge less.
And many,
at their discretion.
particularly smaller municipalities, charge less because you're trying to attract that kind of development. But certainly,
That is part of it,
That's
the
right.
issue of attracting someone.
Sure.
And that's what,
yeah.
that's what you do.
Conservation, and we'll go back to conservation.
A little bit of a rhetorical and also a hypothetical question here, but I think it's one that needs to be looked at eventually. And under our goals, we want sustainable and progressive growth, and we want jobs for the region, and we want services at the most economical rate. Now in North Huron, we've had discussions about extending services out to Hutton Heights and for developing industrial land out south of Wickham into Wallenheim Township, because that's really about the only place that we can grow in the north end of North Huron. If we did that and we extended services south on number 4 highway, it would benefit both municipalities with Morris Turnberry, because that would open up land in Morris Township for development, possibly residential or industrial. Would Morris Turnberry be willing to help share in the cost of extending those services?
I think we'd be getting tremendously ahead of ourselves in such a situation, because you have to show, before you change the land use stuff, you have to show the need for it.
You would have to do a comprehensive review.
Yeah, so you're
So
back
you're
here.
talking about going south.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, hypothetical and rhetorical.
It isn't
but-
gonna happen, like, if we're not gonna do it for residential, because you've got 400 some units up in behind the school. So it's gonna be a tough sell to, do a comprehensive review, to ever get more residential lots out of agricultural use. It'll never happen in the foreseeable future, in my estimation.
I want to go down to Councilor Bailey if I can first.
We've got off track. Could you repeat the question you had? I heard an answer. It was a question about the assets. Where are the taxes, where we're going with that?
The assessment?
Assessment, sure.
Yeah, it wasn't a question, I guess the question was, what do you do with assessment? But what do you do? I'm interested in hearing perspectives on, again, I'm not going to tie you to it, but perspectives on when one side has land, the other side has services, there's clearly mutual benefits to doing something together. What do you do about assessment in that scenario? And I want to, since I said that, I thought of another possibility, and that is that if there's some sort of concept of assessment sharing, there may not be, but if there is, it can either be increasing or it could be decreasing. So for instance, in the central Huron-Goderich arrangement, they agreed on a sliding scale, the land that went into Goderich, as it gets developed, they're going to share assessment on a sliding scale, and eventually central Huron doesn't get any more assessment 20, 25 years after development. You could also do it the other way. You could also have an assessment sharing arrangement whereby North Huron gets very little, if anything, at the beginning, but over time begins to share more in the assessment as time goes on. Something to think about. So I come back to my question around what can be done, should be done about assessment in a situation like this where you each have a valuable asset used to the other.
I guess I couldn't be in favor of any type of assessment sharing unless we could absolutely guarantee that that was going to the services that we're charging for. But if it was just going to the general coffers, then that it should not be charged there or part and parcel of a service.
Okay, and again, just normally, I think we touched on this earlier, normally, I don't know what I guess North Huron has said they haven't made any decisions, clearly, it isn't in place yet. But if it were, normally assessment charges don't necessarily go to the service. They could, you could put them in the reserve for future servicing or bridge replacement or the actual sewer and water, but that would be,
I think we're repeatedly hearing about a burden that we're putting on the system and their ability to keep the system up. And also, I think it's the same as what Deputy Mayor Redmond was saying. That makes sense. We're talking about how do you make sure the other party is paid fairly or appropriately for what they're providing. If you go beyond them, you're collecting fees for other things. We're looking for services, not looking for other.
I wasn't going to bring it up, but Wyndham Creek development, basically, since it happened, it has been a drain on North Huron. From staff time, having to share, putting in half the road, somebody at some time coming along and developing the other side of the road. And the unfortunate part, yes, it's close to the schools. Not everybody wants to be close to the schools. And I have heard a number of ratepayers that say, if that is our only housing, when they retire and move to a retirement home, they may be forced to build in another municipality because they will not drive past two schools with the number of students to get in and out of that area. It's unfortunate, but it is a reality. That unless it is developed fairly quickly and a road out of that development to 86, I do not see it developing near as quick as the proposals. And it's one of those things that the way to get in and out of that development is tied up on busy streets in Wyndham already. That maybe in 50 years, there might be enough to have everything done and have a complete development there. But there's a lot of people question going in there under the current road system. An exit to 86 and an exit out of the north end seem to be one of the things that may be a stumbling block, and that basically we spend staff time sending the taxes back to Morris River in the meantime.
yeah, certainly commercial development at the south end of that might spur an alternate access.
All these issues that were raised, they were known things before North Huron has taken on these developments. These are all known facts. That, residential development is generally considered to be negative to the society.
I've seen various studies about it. So, but it doesn't.
All the issues brought up there, the transportation issues with the schools, the cost of putting the school into North Huron was easily a bit of a burden to North Huron also. So I think there's some political decisions that have played into all these issues, and there were no easy before developments took place.
Scott, can I just go back to the role of the interest in the sharing of the profits on development?
development that can only happen if we share resources and land. Except there's some wrong use, so you're saying you're absolutely not interested, not keeping it all. You want us to put the services in, but you do not want to share the financial.
Why would we model those properties to the level that we pretty much serve?
Well, it's up to you what you do, how you get the money. I'm just thinking you just give us what 30% of whatever taxes you're shooting. If you guys decide to put it up 30, that's up to you, just like it's up to us.
We're not even sure it's legal to
So we just stay on the subject. Does anybody else on the other side want to comment? That's it. You want to keep all the financial gains clearly?
Did you not hear through Mike Cohen's presentation, what came out loud and clear to me is these properties have to be competitive in their cost, or the developers are going to move on down the road. And if you follow those excessive fees beyond the real true cost of the servicing, they're nothing going to happen anyway.
Oh, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if we charge an access of $50. I'm not talking about that, I'm asking for a sharing situation, a fair sharing situation. We have the services, you have the land. I'm not talking whether we charge $50 million or $5 million, just asking if you're willing to share.
How is it a fair scenario when a certain property would have to pay their taxes and then a third again? That's not fair in my.
We're not just talking with these properties. You've actually said all properties currently serviced by North Huron and all Morris Cranberry properties bordering North Huron.
And you're telling me you're going to keep all the money.
Well, we actually have services to provide our ratepayers as well.
Was the, I think you raised a good point, was the bordering North Huron, is that point just for the bordering properties that are receiving services?
The ones that are able to hook up.
That in fact are receiving
Yeah.
services, right, so not
So
somebody.
it would be as to the hookups and using the service. One thing that nobody's brought forward, but we checked a number of places around, what the actual water costs were actually significantly less than many of the other municipalities around. We were hoping that we could come to some agreement somehow that other than just bumping the rates so that they wouldn't be near as competitive as they are right now. The actual water and sewer rates in North Huron are considerably lower than a number of the other municipalities. If our neighbors say that if we have to address it in the rates, we were hoping that there might be some other way of addressing it rather than possibly making ourselves less competitive by moving the rates up.
We've said we wanted to pay our fair share.
You want the ratepayer to pay. That council is not prepared to do anything to help bring development
you're
in,
talking-
because the person developing a property would pay all costs. If
If
I'm
you're
hearing
talking
you
capital fees, hookup fees, that sort of stuff, yes. And user fees. Not taking a portion of the taxes for that particular property and giving it to North Huron because yous aren't charging enough for your rates. Because yous are running your business poorly, you want to take taxes out of our municipality to subsidize your system. And that's not fair.
Just so, I'm going to weigh in on that because I'm not hearing that, Councilor. What I'm hearing is that they're going to do a rate study to see if they're charging the right amounts. And there is likely going to be adjustments, like there is across the board in a lot of municipal services. But I can't recall the reason offhand, but for the reasons that North Huron has given, they would like to have a portion of the assessment. I don't think I heard them say that they're doing that to pay for capital deficiencies.
I don't think I've heard them say that they're going to do the study yet. The paper
Actually,
they
Gary
put
did
forward
say
to
this.
us was for discussions and was followed immediately by a moratorium on services. So I'm not sure how that was discussions.
Gary did mention that the rate study has been commissioned. BM Ross is doing a rate study, so that will be coming. Do you have a timeline on that?
That's work by spring, May, June. It's sooner rather than later.
I'd like to go to Councillor South.
Yes, but are you aware of an agreement with any of these municipalities that are, and I'll just use it for an example, but, you know, $2,500 for the water, $3,500 for the sewer, and so much a cubic meter for the water you use. Yes, and nothing else. No assessment, nothing, just pay so much a meter for the water. Well, that does your sewer too, and your capacity things. So are you aware of any kind of thing like that, just a straight clean cut deal?
I think they do exist. There might be a surcharge in the cost of the per unit rate, but I think they do exist. I think one exists with Goddard's and Central Huron for the Zares, Walmart's, and Tire Plaza.
We have an agreement with Kearns for the edge of Brussels, and it is water is 2 tons, sewer is 1.5 tons, and that's it.
Well,
That's it.
that sounds.
And then, of course, if you connect, there's a connection. That's it.
Councillor Brown.
Okay. I just want to give you a comparison here. If you own a farm beside my farm, and I had the outlet for the drainage, do you think it would be right for me to ask you to pay for 1.5 times getting rid of the water, plus, say, give me 10 bushel a day for your corn? Would that be fair?
Not a farmer, can you give me some other? Can you do the car thing where I own the car? You take my car and then I'll wear us out, you give it back to me? I
No,
thought,
there's a question that, everybody pays fairly. You cannot ask anything about costs.
Actually, in drainage and farm to farm, it's, unless you go to an engineer to do the planning, that the subsidy eats up more than the engineer's wages. There's all kinds of deals made, and I know for a fact, I have paid for all the cement tile to go across a neighbor's property because I needed the tile in there.
I'm saying on an issue where you got a drainage, an engineer involved, there's no deal that ever, did you ever give anybody extra on top of paying for? Yeah, that's the stuff.
Not on top, in an engineered drain, the report is the law. It's written down, there's nothing else added to it.
Exactly, and you cannot go back and ask for extras.
I think it's as simple as the fact that, you know, a consultant was hired, and when back from that report was, what is in place is fair. It's got all the costs covered. There's additional money being paid by Morris Turnberry presently, as has been in the past, and moving forward, there's provisions to look after any capacity and extra capacity needed in the future. So I don't know what more we need to look at. I think it's quite evident of what came out of the consultant report.
I guess I'll veer off topic a little bit. Curious as to the immediate reason that a moratorium on services was slapped on so quickly. If there is a rate study to be done, why the sudden rush to cease and desist future agreements? I think we need to continue moving forward progressively, and I don't think we'll ever do that with moratoriums in place.
Well, fair question.
Basically, North Huron has talked about it for 5 to 6 years. As more of our capacity, got eaten up, it became more and more central to us as to how close we get to that 80% capacity, as to have to doing other things, that it's no economic advantage to us of any account just supplying the service. Because there's not enough money into it to make it profitable supplying that service.
And again, the consultant's report is definitely stating that more than once that the capacity issue needs to be put down. And also that capacity is not being, it's not considered in the investment.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you're not supposed to make money on services, are you? So you're complaining about not making money on services, I don't think you're supposed to profit from services.
So I think I would qualify what Vincent said, you're not making, there's no financial gain in North Huron's books. I will bring you back to the goals. There would presumably be benefit to North Huron as we use Pioneer for an example, excellent development, the kind of agricultural value added that I think we all agree is really helpful in the area. And so maybe it doesn't have a financial gain, but it might have some other spin-off benefits for North Huron. Councilor?
As we stand now, we have enough capacity in Wing for our water and sewer. And so if we grow our capacity or our demand in Morris Turnberry, and all of a sudden we need to expand the sewage treatment in our water wells and so on, is Morris Turnberry, because we have sufficient now, is Morris Turnberry willing to pay for the complete upgrade?
Yes, we already said.
Complete upgrade.
It's on the percentage of your usage. It's on the percentage of your usage.
Correct.
But
we pay for more than the percentage that we're using?
But we don't need more in Wayne. So why would we pay 80% of the cost to upgrade when we don't need it?
Well, a user in Morris Turnberry, a property, they become your user when the services you start to provide. So they're part of your system.
So then we're helping
It's your own system, it's your system.
Right, but we don't need more.
You don't need to develop it.
We need to develop the area, I agree. But
It just happens that the area that
the fringe developed is on our fringe.
is on the fringe and it's within the boundaries of Morris Turnberry.
So you want to only pay 10% of the cost of the upgrade?
We want to pay our fair share.
I think we established earlier that the surcharge had a variety of purposes from North Huron's perspective, but part of it was the existing expenditure that had already occurred in the past, because they're plugging into an existing system. But the other part was that you might be inching closer to that 80% line faster, like you're saying, faster than you would be if you weren't providing services to other users. So I think, unless I misunderstood it, I think there was some general understanding that the surcharge was justified in some way. What it is, what the actual number is, would remain to be seen. It seems to me that the assessment issue is outside. I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but it's outside of the direct discussion of a user pay principle. We're now talking about, as I said, you've got two people that want to dance, and the question is, what's the music sound like? Because you've got land and services, and this assessment piece is not directly tied, because there's general agreement that the costs of the user pay principle. So I just float that again. It's a tough issue to grapple, but I don't expect we're going to come to a conclusion tonight. I'm going to ask you soon how long you want to go. But I would encourage both sides to think about what is the rationale behind the assessment question, and what's the rationale behind the assessment resistance. and see if that brings us any closer to common ground.
I'd like to, I know there's there's a sense of, this is Morris Turnberry's business to decide what they're going to do with the revenue and what they're going to pay for and all that. The sense that if there is development that requires servicing, that development is going to be an advantage to all of Morris Turnberry, not just to the actual user. And just as it is an advantage to us to have development in the neighborhood. And so that is the sense that there's an additional payment. I think referring to it as assessment is a misnomer, because we can't assess another municipality. That's not legal. What we're suggesting is that the amount being paid now, we feel, it's our opinion, that it's not adequate to cover both the payment of the existing system that we're tapping into, plus possible major redevelopment way off in the future. And if we're wrong in that, we need to change it. Let's prove one way or another objectively who is right.
And that's not what we heard from the consultant. Consultant is very positive.
We disagree with you.
Yeah, that's why he's not here today.
You disagree with the consultant. Well, you hired a consultant and then you're not listening to them. That's sort of the main word.
So you disagree on the rate or that the costs are being covered, which is, I guess, what the rate study is going to. Presumably, if that's shared, I'm sure with public information, Morris Turnberry can look at that as well.
Each council read basically a certain amount of what they wanted to out of this document. Basically, we feel we're supplying capacity that we don't feel there's any that we're getting any return on it. That is something, and the moratorium is that we do not further cut our capacity until we have the rate study and further studies. And if you put a moratorium on it, you've got to put it before the council on a certain date, and it's effective as of a certain date. There's a number of things, but it's important to take a look, and in just looking at that 2.1%, maybe we're not being paid for the West Cast water at the plant on 86, but it doesn't seem proportional to us for the capacity that we guarantee, and we guarantee all deals that we have, we will honor them. But there may have to be some kind of claim in the near future for us both to move ahead. And we have not received anything as an intention of Morris Turnberry Council to help spur development. Anybody doing development has to pay all the costs. North Huron Council has been a little different. I think I'll thank you very much for coming, Scott, but I believe we are currently at an impasse. The last few minutes, a number of things have been reiterated, and I think we're spinning our wheels so far tonight. But thank you very much for doing the interest, the goals, moving through a number of points.
I believe what you just stated, Neil, is that North Huron doesn't believe that these developments on their fringe are doing any good to your settlement area in North Huron. And that's not correct. There's definite benefit to your municipality, and you're not taking that into consideration whatsoever. So I think we're really missing what the potential is of from servicing these areas?
That if we are asking the person paying the tax bill to cover all expenses, it's something that North Huron has not necessarily done. We have staff that work with people to try and get some type of advantage to having them in our municipality. We probably will not be able to keep the low rates to our neighbors that if we don't get any help in attracting.
I guess at the end of the day, things like asset management tell us what future cost replacements are going to be. Those reserves need to be gradually built up. And it has to be paid one way or the other. It has to either be paid in the rate charge or it has to be paid in assessment. And it isn't, you know, and as we know, the province is developing things like Infrastructure Ontario with low interest loans in lieu of giving grants like they used to pursue our water projects. So money is tighter now, for sure, from the provincial government. But I think Mayor Gowing has asked a question, does North Huron, and I think you put the answer up here, I think North Huron has acknowledged that there are benefits to commercial industrial development for the area happening in the Morris-Turnberry side of the line. So we are approaching, we're beyond the 2-hour mark, and so I want to ask both councils, how much longer you would like to go. I have a couple of suggestions on where we go from here, but first I'm going to ask you how much longer you want to go.
I think it's
Are all properties in Morris-Turnberry that are under the agreement, are they all charged the exact same rate? There's no side agreements or anything like that? Are all properties in the agreement charged 1.5% tax rate? That's the certainty.
There are 2 councillors that, and I'm in discussions with your administrator on that. And it's not a side deal or any favoritism. It may be a result of some agreement that was put in place 25 years ago. There has to be, everyone has to pay their fair share.
That's part of your rate there, the property, one of the properties I have in question is, I guess, a significant amount going into your.
Well, just along those lines, like the consultant report that was given to us, we, even as of today, haven't been able to make sure that, you know, one of the larger institutional uses was included in the figures or not. So, you know, there's some things here, and that would change tremendously the difference in assets and usage and that scenario there. So, you know, there's some definite things that need to be hammered out as to, you know, whether those figures are included or not. And it does change, you know, the situation that we're looking at carefully. So, you know, I think that has to be addressed, and it's going to be, I'm sure. And, but it does make it different where it has the potential of changing things.
That there may have been something grandfathered from a period back. We would have to go and check all the, basically check with Julie as to how the billings are, and Julie Wheeler would be the one that would quickly be able to answer that question on Morris-Turnberry, because she handles all the billing for water and sewer.
I think getting back to, you know, I think we've had a great discussion here, Scott, and we probably will come down to where we're butting heads too. So, you know, I think, you know, we could move on and see, you know, what the next steps are.
Okay. Why don't we look at conclusion and next steps then? In terms of conclusion, I think, and as I mentioned at at the outset, I'll produce a report as a result of tonight. And hopefully it won't be one that you'll agree on what the report says, because it'll essentially be a summary of what has been discussed. So I won't be imposing any of my own thoughts or recommendations. So that will be forward. But what's occurred to me is that there's really two issues that we've touched on in broad ways. One is the user pay concept, and there seems to be general agreement that user pay is fine. Those numbers are going to change, there's asset management, but nobody has said that people shouldn't pay the fair cost of receiving the service. And that includes, the user pay includes some sort of a surcharge with respect to existing investment and maybe the administration that's not in there and so on. And those kinds of things that you've said, as Councillor Hallahan pointed out, are quite common. Where there is the disagreement, it seems to me, is the payment in lieu of assessment, in lieu of taxes, that we're still calling assessment. And so I think that's the area where I'll encourage, as I said, I'll encourage both municipalities to think about that a little more. So for North Huron's standpoint, what are the reasons that you are making that request, and to try to think through them and be as succinct and clear as possible? And similarly for Morris Turnberry, what are the reasons that you're resisting having a shared assessment? I just want to take you back to this picture, that if there was no municipal boundary, you would have both land and servicing and 100% of the assessment. I'm not suggesting the amount, but because there's a municipal boundary there, if you bring the land and servicing together, the question, of course, that we're grappling with is what do you do with assessment or payment in lieu of assessment. So I'd like to put that into a report back to you. I'd like to have a little more discussion with Gary and Nancy together, like the three of us, not individually. And they may have some suggestions as to the next steps as well. And that's all I have for you at this point. Is the next steps would be I report back, I meet with Nancy and Gary, and we brainstorm a little bit on the next steps, and then collectively report back.
I think our feeling at Morris Turnberry is we'd like to see a committee formed from each council. In that way, we have very pointed discussions over some of these issues and see if we can find some common ground and move ahead that way. Yes, a couple of individuals, three to four.
Be the head of council and one or two,
Something like that.
would North Huron be in agreement to that kind of approach?
I think that we have to go back and look at some of the things we've discussed tonight before we as a council would make that. And it should be a council decision. And I'm not prepared to go down the road, yes or no, at this time.
Okay, so I would ask then Gary to put that on an agenda item on a future council agenda to contemplate Morris Turnberry's request to meet as, do you want to name, so the head of council and two members of council?
That would be, we had discussed even one, it's going to be pretty pointed discussion on some of these issues. One would be enough for us, but North Huron's.
Okay, so the head of council and one other, if North Huron wants to suggest an alternative arrangement.
That would be our suggestion, at least.
And then any answers would be brought back to the appropriate council.
Oh, yes, it'd be a committee of council and responsible for taking it back to all of council.
And presumably the CAOs would be part of that, those discussions as well as advisory.
Certainly.
But not part of the committee.
The takeaway for me from this is that we need to have in mind that we have to come to an agreement on this very, very quickly. We don't want a protracted series of meeting. This is a problem that we have to solve. We don't want to keep the moratorium, and we don't want
the idea of a smaller committee. It can be a very pointed discussion. It's great to have all of council, get everyone's opinion, but to move ahead in a timely fashion, I think it needs to be smaller.
Okay, Councilor Reach.
Just to expand on that, Mayor Dodd, I wonder if we should look at having members of North Huron Council sit on North Turnberry Economic Development and vice versa. We have an economic development committee that meets regularly, and when we should be doing this meeting as well, so that we have a better idea of what's thinking on the economic
That's
development.
maybe it's a separate topic, maybe something great for future discussions, but in process, and we need to deal with this.
Oh, absolutely, but down the road, we need to work closely together on economic development, whether it be residential, industrial,
Well, with connection moratorium in place, this could be quite limited, so we need to have some movement on that.
So a great suggestion, Councilor Reach, and that would certainly come out of either council could propose that at a different meeting and pursue that in the appropriate avenues.
I just question how much economic development North Huron wants. They want to put this 80% usage in the sewage, so I question how much economic development do we want?
We have land in East Wawash, and we have land in Blythe that are suitable for economic development, so we aren't just talking Wingland, we're talking North Huron.
So you just don't want economic development?
We want economic development in North Huron and Morris Turnberry.
I think what I heard was that they didn't, it wasn't that they were trying at all costs to avoid the 80% line, but it is a cost factor in the consideration. So with that, I want to thank both councils for your open and frank discussion and for voluntarily coming to the joint meeting for mediation. I want to thank the audience for being extremely courteous tonight, and I hope you found it interesting. And again, you have lots of avenues available to express your opinions on the subject. And the final step is for each council to receive a motion to adjourn.
Before we go there, Scott, I just like to present you with a small token from the two councils. There's a package that got moved. We really appreciate you putting the effort and your resources to work for us to try and come to a resolution here. And I think we did a great discussion. I'm not so sure we're any closer, but we're on the way to getting everything here. And thank you very much.
You know that I'm on the county payroll, so I don't need this. But I will share it with everybody at the office. So if you can do the motions to adjourn, and then we're...
Motion by Deputy Secretary, second by Councilor Smuck. She adjourns this joint meeting.
Hodgman, Campbell, all in favor of the motion? Carried.